Well, let me begin by saying thank you very much, Senator, and thank you all for the opportunity to come before you today. I have some prepared remarks, which I will try to get through very quickly, because I think our best use of our time is to allow a fulsome opportunity for asking you questions and providing the answers. As I've said, I'm pleased to appear before this committee today to assist in your study of Bill C-45, and I understand that the committee is particularly interested in studying the implications of 45 with organized crime. I appear today not only in my capacity as Parliamentary Secretary to both the Ministers of Justice and the Ministers of Health, but also with someone, if I may say, with nearly 4 decades of law enforcement experience, including a decade as the Chief of the Toronto Police Service. And throughout my previous career, I actually had direct responsibility for confronting organized crime and promoting the safety of Canadians. I served in a number of capacities, including the Chief of Detectives in Toronto. I was responsible and oversaw the formation and management of the largest major organized crime investigative unit in Ontario. I also served on the National Executive Committee of Criminal Intelligence Services Canada and chaired the Canadian Chiefs Organized Crime Committee. I hope to bring first-hand account of how the criminal elements in our society have profited from the current regime of cannabis production. The starting point for any discussion concerning the legalization and strict regulation of cannabis is to acknowledge the current environment. And according to Statistics Canada, the estimated cannabis consumption by Canadians as of 2015 totaled over 697 tons of cannabis, with an estimated market value of $6.2 billion. The question must be asked, who is reaping these profits? And during the testimony of Superintendent Gopil from the RCMP before this committee on March 22nd, he noted that about 40% of organized crime groups in Canada are involved in the cannabis market. As I mentioned, I had served for over a decade on the National Executive Committee of Criminal Intelligence Services Canada. That organization identified nearly 900 organized crime groups, 78% of which had as their primary source of income illicit drugs. And as the superintendent has testified, about 40% of that 900, their primary source of income is the illicit production and distribution of cannabis. The numbers involved in that illicit production are quite disturbing and amount to approximately $20 million a day nationwide. That is why our government has been clear at the outset that a key objective of the Cannabis Legalization and Regulation Initiative is to take these illegal profits from the hands of criminal organization, and that is clearly set out in the Act's purposes under Clause 7. Once enacted, Bill C-45's legal framework will provide Canadians with a legitimate and quality-controlled choice to purchase cannabis, one that will require that cannabis is produced under strict regulation and oversight, and one in which the cannabis has been tested for adulterating chemicals and pesticides, and in which the cannabis is of known potency. A competitive legal industry is critical to reducing the scope and the scale of the illicit market. For adult Canadians who choose to purchase cannabis legally, they will be able to do so knowing that they will not be supporting a criminal enterprise and that the profits from their purchases are to be reinvested in legitimate businesses supporting their communities. And this will significantly impact the demand driver that currently exists for organized crime to profit. All activities operating outside of the proposed new legal framework will remain prohibited. And it's a very important point, I think, that it needs to be re-emphasized, that law enforcement will retain all of the tools that they currently possess to investigate and prosecute organized crime groups involved in the illegal production, distribution, import, and export of cannabis. All of their authorities, all of the offences, and all of the penalties are being retained under this legislation. Some have pointed out the lack of success in other jurisdictions in stamping out the illicit market and are asking, why would we be different? And I may suggest that many of you have heard me say that we are engaging in a process, not a single event. And I believe it would be naive to declare that we could displace the entire illicit market overnight. But Canadians know that by investing in not only the enforcement of our existing strong laws, of creating criminal sanctions for the illegal activities of organized crime, but also introducing an alternative choice for Canadian adults who make the choice to use cannabis so that they may make a legitimate choice, a safer choice, a regulated and accountable choice, which will be more socially responsible and more positive, create more positive outcomes for all of our communities. Another issue that I would like to address concerns the need to keep criminals and organized crime networks, whether they be domestic or foreign, from infiltrating the legal cannabis market. This issue is closely related to the possibility of investments made by companies through offshore tax havens. Under the current medical cannabis system, Health Canada works very closely with the RCMP to carry out detailed law enforcement record checks that involve engaging with local law enforcement agencies nationwide to look at intelligence gathered for enforcement purposes. And this is very important. This is not simply a criminal records check, but this is a very deep dive into all of our intelligence databases and local law enforcement databases so that we may have as much information as is currently available to the law enforcement community that will inform the decision whether or not an individual should be allowed to participate in this new industry. These checks are used to surface any additional information that can be brought to bear on the issue of the decision to issue a security clearance, including any known associations with criminals or organized crime. And once the RCMP provides this information to Health Canada, the Department considers all sources of evidence to determine whether the individual poses an unacceptable risk to the integrity of the legal production system. I would point out to this committee that we have 4 years of very comprehensive experience with this system of security background check, in that since the implementation of the MMPR regulations in 2013 and the licensing of medical licensed producers in this country, the RCMP have conducted literally thousands of background checks in a very comprehensive review. And quite frankly, the largest complaint that I have heard is how long and how vigorous that background security process is. But quite frankly, I think it demonstrates the commitment of Health Canada and to our law enforcement officials to ensure that there is no infiltration of organized crime. As part of the new regulatory framework, Health Canada has proposed to expand upon the list of individuals that will require security clearance to include the directors and officers of any parent company. And in addition, the licensed company will also be required to develop and maintain an organizational security plan that sets out the procedures to be put in place to prevent cannabis from being diverted to the illegal market. This security plan must be submitted to the Minister of Health as part of each license application, along with the identity of individuals occupying these senior positions, physical security provisions, record keeping and reporting, participation in a new national cannabis tracking system, and the announced and unannounced inspections of all facilities will contribute to ensuring that licensed producers are highly scrutinized before they are awarded a production license and on a regular basis thereafter. Mr. Chair, I am confident that law enforcement agencies across Canada will continue to maintain their focus on organized crime and associated activities throughout the transition period and beyond. And in order to assist them in doing that, in the conversations that we've had right from the outset in the discussion of this legislation and the enforcement requirements to respond, we heard very clearly from law enforcement about some capacity issues to deal with organized crime. And in response to that, our government committed, for example, $113 million to be invested in the RCMP and CBSA to improve and enhance, and in many cases restore, the RCMP's ability to conduct comprehensive and effective organized crime investigations directly related to the criminal enterprises involved in the illegal cannabis industry, and also significant new investments in CBSA to improve border integrity, issues to make sure that there is no illicit cannabis either being imported into Canada or illicit cannabis being imported out of Canada. Mr. Speaker, that concludes my prepared remarks, and I'm happy to respond to your questions.
You've been effective in the time that was allocated to you. It's my pleasure,